the latest update on the battle over the college football format, football playoff format, really has it all. We got another fast one being pulled by the SEC. SEC and Big Ten getting further apart. We've got a nightmare Big 12 ACC playoff scenario floated out there by Greg Sankey, and even a really nice concession, I think, for the Big 12 and ACC that's kind of buried in all of this. So I'm just going to read you some of the highlights here straight from the article from Brandon, who did an awesome job with this. Interestingly enough, so the commissioners all met last week. They had a 2-day session, and Brandon Marcello reports the college football playoff format was not discussed in detail. December 1st is the deadline to get figured out what they're going to do in 2026, right? So with the season coming up, I mean, that's a lot closer than what it actually feels like right now as we sit on June 29th. But the college football playoff staff instead presented proposed updates to the metrics used by the selection committee. So what's taking place is, instead of talking about the actual format, we're getting a lot of debate about how the SEC wants this to be strength of schedule focused, and we need even more emphasis on strength of schedule. And so they've hired consultants, and they're doing all this work to try and figure that out. In fact, the college football playoff hired consultants from Google and a professor at the University of Buffalo to help develop the new metrics. Conferences and Notre Dame have been asked to review the data and provide feedback in the coming weeks. More information is expected to be shared soon. Google is going to fight for the SEC. That's what we got. The SEC these days teaming up with Goldman Sachs and Google. Just what we need. The article says, still, the SEC's cries for help have been partially answered. The playoff, with the help of outsourced mathematicians, was tasked in the spring to refine the metrics the committee studies to inform their decisions. The tweaked metrics, so here you go, the tweaked metrics primarily deal with strength of schedule and include changes that would weigh non-conference games more heavily, thereby negating the need for the SEC to mirror the Big Ten's 9-game conference schedule, sources told CBS Sports. What that means is the SEC has successfully pulled a fast one here, specifically on the Big Ten. I mean, really on everybody, but mostly on the Big Ten. And that's what starts to get really interesting about where all this goes. Like, the rift between the SEC and the Big Ten seems to be really growing here, and it's all over the playoff issue. And the Big 12 and the ACC, which, according to Marcello, like jointly presented the 5+11 format that drove the wedge between them, they really started it. So I don't know. I think it was our Webb a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of shows ago at least, who said, was this a poison pill from Brett Yormark just to try and throw this out there to disrupt this perfect marriage between the Big Ten and the SEC, where they were so united in just driving everything where the sport was going and throwing everybody else so far down, kicking everybody while they're down, just leading this in a poor direction. Maybe this was an idea to get them fighting with each other to disrupt all of that, slow some of the, hey, let's keep pushing toothpaste out of the tube that can't be pushed back in, related to the greater good of the game. It's interesting. Because if the SEC is doing this, I mean, this has been what the Big Ten's been most pissed about the whole time, is the fact that the SEC won't go to a 9-game conference schedule like the Big Ten is. And the SEC says, no, we're gonna keep playing our FCS teams. There was a point made in the article that Texas was the only SEC school to not play an FCS team last year. Meanwhile, half the Big Ten did not play an FCS school. So that's some real tension right now. All the reporting says that. That's some real tension. And now here comes the SEC. They have pushed through this. Oh, we need more emphasis on strength of schedule. And they officially get, all right, we will more heavily consider non-con schedules so you don't have to go to a 9-game conference schedule yourself. Where's this going to go, man? Big Ten's got to be furious about that. Furious. They thought, I mean, the SEC had kind of been co-supporting for months the idea of the 4 auto buys thing, to the point where I had just acquiesced. I was like, well, that's going to happen. Big Ten and the SEC both want it. It's going to happen. Now here it is. Big Ten's not getting their buddy to go along with them in Greg Sankey. The article says the SEC might continue with 8 conference games and schedule FCS opponents for future non-conference games. Quote, it's the biggest of the big issues, a Big Ten athletics director said. Yeah, Big Ten's not happy. Big Ten's not happy here. Now, I will say, As much as all that is very entertaining and in a lot of ways great, there was a point made in this article where I was like, okay, well, that's kind of a nightmare scenario. Hopefully that doesn't happen. They quoted Greg Sankey on the Dan Patrick Show, of all things, where Greg Sankey said his ideal playoff scenario is actually, he would say, I'd give no allocations. I'd just make it the 12 best teams. I was clear on that. Now, when we get into rooms, we make political compromises to achieve an outcome. If they go to like, Sankey has actually said like he wouldn't be opposed to staying at 12, but if they go to 16 all at large or 12 all at large, whatever it is, whatever the number, 12, 14, 16, and it's just all at large, yeah, that's a nightmare scenario for the Big 12 and the ACC. Absolutely it is. Nightmare. Now, it doesn't seem like the Big 10 and the SEC would actually be willing to do that, and I think a lot of it would be for fear of a lawsuit over the language of, well, they do get the final say in what happens in the next playoff format. They are legally obligated to give input and have discussions with everybody else. And so I think there's already been threats of lawsuits floated out there. I think they would probably view that like, well, I'm sure we'll get sued. And even if we think we're right, we would have to deal with billable hours and we would have to deal with the headache that becomes. And I don't know that we really want to do that. And to what end, right? How much does that really help us relative to where we would be if we get the 4 auto bids or if we get 5 plus 11, whatever? But you just never know. And you do have to remember that anytime you don't sign on the dotted line of what they say, there is the possibility that the two big boys come back with something that is even worse for you. And so I just do raise that possibility as like, that's something Greg Sankey has vocalized. That's something that would be very bad for the Big 12 and the ACC. If it's literally you have to get a team in the top 12 by eye of the playoff committee with non-conference schedule being heavily weighted when the Big 10 and the SEC don't seem to be all that willing to play you that much in the non-con. Like this, you see where that really leads and how that could be very, very bad for the Big 12 and the ACC and their actual playoff access. But the other part of that too that, really holds up there is group of 6, like making sure there's group of 6 access. I mean, if you think it gets tough for the Big 12 and the ACC in a 16 team all at large thing, even tougher for your group of 6. You better hope that you have an Ashton Genty out there every year to kind of carry the day for a team like Boise. Now, if you're wondering about where Brett Yormark is on all of this, nothing has changed. Brett Yormark says, quote, I'm going to continue to double down on that format in reference to 5 plus 11. So anybody, and I know there are plenty of you out there, I've heard from you, who don't like that, and you wish Brett Yormark would just go along with taking his 2 auto bids, not happening, says the commish. He is continuing to double down on 5 plus 11. Finally, I will say one nice thing, and I mentioned the scheduling piece of this. Let's just say this about the scheduling, okay? Here's a good outcome that could come out of all of this for the Big 12. From the article, the SEC sticking with 8 games would all but eliminate the possibility of a Big 10 SEC showcase, which had been discussed at previous summits. The scheduling agreement would have pitted all 16 SEC teams against a Big 10 rival. And now a Big 10 source says, quote, that wouldn't make sense for our guys to add another tough game. So that was on it. That was one of the things I really hated the most about where it seemed like things were going. It seemed like, in March, April, it's going to be 4-4, 2-2-1. And once that happens, they'll go to the play-in games at the end of the year. And then the scheduling agreement will happen between the Big 10 and the SEC. SEC will go to 9 conference games and then have a scheduling agreement game with the Big 10. So there's 10 games on everybody's schedule already. You're never going to be able to get them on your non-con. You're never going to be able to get them on your non-con, which is then going to hurt your strength of schedule if you're competing for, I guess at that point, it would really just be like 1 or 3 at-large bids. But it just locks you out from having any real access to them, getting respect by playing them, beating them. That at least seems to be off the table here. And then if the SEC is only going to be playing 8 conference games, seemingly just math would tell you that it opens up more opportunities to play teams from the Big 10, but particularly the SEC. And I guess if you're holding out hope for a Bedlam, something like that happening, I mean, that opens up more room on the schedule for it to be there, though. I have my doubts that unfortunately we'll get that back. But anyway, that's the latest on the playoff format. The next meeting is scheduled for, by the way, it's like September 24th, I believe, and it's at Big Ten HQ. And so they could obviously schedule something between now and then, but Marcelo reported that there's no meeting that is scheduled between now and then to actually discuss the format. So it seems like everybody's just like still retreated back into their corners for right now. And we'll see where it goes, but nothing seems to be really moving quickly. And if they're not meeting until late September, they'll have roughly 2 months to get that decision made during the season about what the future playoff format is going to be for 2026. So anyway, there you have it. That's it. Good show tonight. A lot going on. Appreciate you guys all being here.